Meanwhile, in the Russian Federation, while Putin's economic forum is underway in St. Petersburg, Russia's own economy continues to lose growth momentum amid the war, sanctions, and strikes by Ukrainian drones. According to Reuters, after growing by nearly 5% in 2024, the Russian Federation's economy slowed to about 1% in 2025, and for 2026, the forecast is only 0.4%. The publication notes additional pressure is being created by Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries, ports, and industrial enterprises, which negatively affects Russia's production and export capabilities. And in Russia and the occupied territories, gasoline is disappearing. In Crimea, fuel is no longer being sold at gas stations, not even with ration cards. The local authorities say it's all due to logistical difficulties. Local residents are standing in kilometer-long lines and searching for gas stations where gasoline is available for open sale. Following Crimea, the gasoline shortage is picking up speed in the Kursk and Belgorod regions, as well as in Ryazan and St. Petersburg. Military experts note that successful drone strikes on logistical routes, particularly the land corridor to the temporarily occupied peninsula, as well as attacks on oil refineries, have practically made fuel deliveries impossible. So, the St. Petersburg Economic Forum opened today. This is one of the biggest events, significant for Putin in his hometown. Yes, where he began his political career. And what are they going to talk about today? What economy, what development, what investments are they going to discuss?
I think today they'll be talking about how accurately our defense forces struck the oil terminals in St. Petersburg last night, and as you mentioned, in Putin's hometown. And at a time when such an important event is taking place, the Economic Forum. This once again highlights that the economy of the Russian Federation is, first of all, vulnerable, not only legally in terms of sanctions regimes and restrictions, but it's also physically vulnerable. Our defense forces can easily reach targets at 1,200 kilometers away, and it's specifically the oil terminals. These are the export capabilities, the export potential of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, which directly allow the Russian Federation to make money and receive revenue for the federal budget. And all of this leads to more strikes like the ones we felt the day before yesterday, a week ago, and have been experiencing for 5 years now. All of this gets turned into missiles, all of this gets turned into shaheds, and all of this gets turned into Russia's ability to wage war against our country. This is exactly the idea: to force the Russian Federation to come to the negotiating table on fair terms. Not on the terms they dream up somewhere, like us leaving Donbass, but on terms where their economy is not just stagnating, but actually in recession. In other words, it's already in the negative, and they're forced to sit down at the negotiating table. And they're forced, well, maybe it's not the opposition, but they have to listen to their colleagues in parliament, in the State Duma. And the communists have repeatedly said that they need to reconsider war spending because we're heading towards some kind of abyss, and stopping this process is quite difficult. The only and simplest way out is to stop the war and reduce military spending. And I think that this is what they should at least be discussing behind the scenes at the Economic Forum. But in public, of course, they'll say the opposite and talk about different things. They'll say that the Russian Federation's economy is growing, that they're closely cooperating with the People's Republic of China. By the way, there's an interesting point here too. China isn't just using the Russian Federation as a source of raw materials, they're actually counting on the collapse of the Russian economy later so they can buy it up for pennies, which is basically what they do everywhere they can. And for them, the Russian Federation is the most interesting piece. A huge territory, and let's say a chunk, or rather a share to be precise, of the global economy that has huge potential if they can get in there with their companies and investments. And I am sure that Putin's team understands this, and the longer they continue active military operations against Ukraine, the deeper they dig themselves into that debt pit to the People's Republic of China. In general, they should be discussing this at the Economic Forum, but I think the discussion will be coming from a slightly different angle.
Reuters reports that the Kremlin is essentially faced with a choice: either continue funding the war or save the economy. Has Russia, or Putin in particular, really reached this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Almost all of their exports are shut down. Metallurgy, oil exports, liquefied natural gas exports, timber, coal, everything is restricted. They have only partial access to foreign markets. The Russian Federation is not that developed, either from a technological standpoint or in terms of, let's say, domestic consumption. They are more focused on exporting raw materials. They exported metallurgical products as raw materials, not finished goods. They exported crude oil. Of course, they had a large number of oil refineries that exported to the European Union as well, but still, their economy is built on a raw materials base, on the export of raw materials. Now, this is restricted, and their economy is in such a state that it can't grow, it can't develop. If they had advanced technologies, serious technologies, and weren't dependent on importing these technologies, then they really could have developed. And now, because of the sanctions and the isolation of the Russian Federation, both in terms of exporting products and importing technologies, they really are in a situation where their economy is stagnating and on the verge of recession. And all of this means direct losses for large private enterprises, job cuts, unpaid wages, and, well, above all, it's not development, but rather a rollback, both for the economy and for entrepreneurial activity. And now, on the contrary, they're tightening the screws. The Russians, the government, is cracking down on both small and medium-sized businesses. They're raising the VAT to 22%, and this is being done in order that
Right up.
the key interest rate, by the way, it used to be 21%. No, it's rolled back a bit to 14.5, if I'm not mistaken. But all this shows that they don't have a strategy. They have no idea what to do next to at least maintain this level. If you analyze the words of the economists at the Moscow Economic Forum, they talked about a 1.8% drop in GDP in January and February. Now it's rolling back a bit, it's being compensated for, but still, it's not enough. And these negative numbers show that the Russian economy is dependent. And when Putin or his team say that they have no idea what sanctions are or how they work, that they don't feel them at all, that's an absolute lie. They do this primarily for their domestic electorate, to reassure the local population, and they also do it to irritate our partners.
If Putin decides to keep funding the war, to find money somewhere, to squeeze it out of the population, to come up with something, impose new taxes, and so on, how much longer can the Russian Federation hold out?
The budget deficit of the Russian Federation, as of today, is about 65 to 68 billion dollars. When they were drafting the budget for 2025, they planned for 50 to 55. Not even half a year has passed yet, and they've already, exceeded the plan they set. And that's good for us, because they're not able to invest in the military-industrial complex. They're not even making payments to the military anymore. They're not making social payments, meaning they're limited in how they can use their remaining budget. There's the National Welfare Fund. It's a kind of cushion they can use in tough times. Right now,
And they're already actively using it. There's probably nothing left in it by now.
before the full-scale invasion, the liquid part of that fund was about $130 billion. Now it's around $40 to $42 billion. Although the total amount is $150 billion, what they can actually use freely, the liquid part, is only $40 billion. And that's not even enough to cover the deficit that's already formed by the 5th month of this year. Just imagine what will happen next. It's only going to get worse, and the economy of the Russian Federation will continue to deteriorate because our defense forces are effectively striking at the physical export potential of the Russian Federation. Right now, we're not talking about prices, but specifically about the physical shipment of oil and liquefied natural gas. Because of this, they can't actively make money or earn super profits, even though oil and gas prices on the markets have surged. And this synergy between the European Union countries and our defense forces is working very effectively. It's really hitting the Russian Federation's economy and their desire to keep waging war. Because if it weren't for this synergy and joint efforts against the Russian Federation's economy, we wouldn't be hearing statements from Russian parliamentarians calling on the president to cut war spending.
And now gasoline is disappearing in Russia, and in some places, you can't even get it with ration coupons. Well, that's a huge problem both for military logistics and for civilian logistics. Because if, for example, bread isn't delivered to the store, that's already a problem. People have nothing to eat. How much could this cause internal dissatisfaction among the population? How will this issue, specifically the problem with gasoline, affect the Russian economy?
Well, let's start with temporarily occupied Crimea, because this situation is being observed there for the first time right now. Due to logistical difficulties, and again, because of the active actions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, they're unable to deliver finished fuel and lubricants to Crimea on time. First of all, the main artery, the most important one, was the Kerch Bridge. At the end of 2022, we effectively targeted the tank cars that were passing over the bridge. The bridge was destroyed, and they imposed certain restrictions on the use of this artery. The alternative is the ferry crossing, but in terms of capacity, it's not as powerful, not as effective, and secondly, it's also still dangerous. And the main artery, as of today, if we set aside those two, runs through temporarily occupied Mariupol, Jankoy, Melitopol, and from Rostov through all these cities, through all these temporarily occupied territories. But the railway hubs, they're also within firing range, and I'm confident that our defense forces will effectively target them and further cut these supply chains so that Crimea, temporarily occupied Crimea, and the Russian Federation's army stationed on the peninsula won't receive fuel and lubricants on time. As for the territory of the Russian Federation, which belonged to them before the full-scale invasion and before 2014, before the war began, there's also a shortage being observed there. And again, our guys are effectively targeting the oil refineries located in the Krasnodar region, and these are the refineries that supplied fuel and lubricants to Crimea and provided for the western part of the Russian Federation. And of course, this shortage will only continue to grow. If you look at it on a federal scale, there are about 38 oil refineries in the Russian Federation, and we've already put about, well, at least 30% of them out of commission. That doesn't mean they're completely shut down and not producing finished fuel and lubricants. But we've already knocked out 30% of the 2.5 million in processing capacity. That's quite a large amount, a significant volume of oil, and even more so when it comes to finished fuel and lubricants.
And on top of that, the Russian Federation is forced to invest huge amounts of money to repair and restart the relevant oil refineries, which then, after just a few days, or sometimes even on the very day they're brought back online, and there have already been such cases, are destroyed again, hit by our drone forces. Mr. Ola, thank you.